The sun rose slowly over the dusty town of Red Creek, painting the wooden buildings and dirt streets in golden light. In this quiet western town, life moved at a steady pace. Farmers tended their fields, shopkeepers arranged goods outside their stores, and the sound of horseshoes clattering against the wooden sidewalks echoed from time to time. But in the midst of this calm, one event had everyone talking, an event that had captured the curiosity of nearly every man and woman in the area. It was the challenge of a lifetime, issued by none other than the town's most remarkable widow. Her name was Margaret Hayes, though most people simply called her the Widow Hayes. She had lost her husband years ago to illness, leaving her to manage the ranch and her prized stallion on her own. Margaret was not like most women in the town. She was strong, independent, and fearless. Someone who had spent years riding, roping, and caring for horses when men thought women should stay at home. Her ranch, perched on a small hill overlooking Red Creek, was the envy of everyone. But what made her truly remarkable, and the center of so much conversation, was her stallion, Thunderbolt. Thunderbolt was no ordinary horse. He was a magnificent black stallion with muscles that rippled under his shiny coat and eyes that glimmered with intelligence and spirit. He was fast, strong, and unyielding, a horse that few men could ride successfully. Every attempt to tame him without skill ended in bruised egos, injured riders, and a sense of awe for the widow who had managed him so well. People often said that Thunderbolt was almost a reflection of Margaret herself, proud, spirited, and impossible to control. One morning, Margaret made an announcement that sent shockwaves through Red Creek. She stood in the center of town, her hat tilted slightly back, hands on her hips, and her boots dusty from a morning ride. "If you're a real cowboy," she called out, her voice carrying clearly through the town square, "prove it on my stallion." Her words were met with gasps and murmurs. A challenge? On Thunderbolt? Many men exchanged skeptical glances. Some laughed, thinking it was impossible. But Margaret's eyes glimmered with determination, and her posture left no room for doubt. She meant what she said, and she wanted someone brave, skilled, and patient enough to ride Thunderbolt. The townsfolk quickly spread the news. Word traveled fast, reaching neighboring towns as well. Within days, 25 men had arrived at the Hayes Ranch, each hoping to claim fame and respect by conquering the wild stallion. Some were seasoned cowboys, confident in their abilities. Others were young men with dreams bigger than their experience. But all shared a common flaw. They underestimated Thunderbolt and the woman who had raised him. The attempts began, one by one. The first man, a tall rancher with a reputation for breaking wild horses, swung onto Thunderbolt's back with confidence. For a few heart-pounding moments, it seemed he might succeed. But Thunderbolt bucked and twisted with such power that the man was thrown into the dirt. He landed hard, grimacing, and dusted himself off with embarrassment, while Margaret watched calmly, her arms folded. Next came a pair of brothers, known locally for their skill in rodeos. They were loud, boastful, and certain they could master the stallion. They took turns, each attempting to ride Thunderbolt with skill and force. But the stallion was clever. He anticipated every move, throwing them off with spins, sudden jumps, and bursts of speed. The brothers tumbled into the dust, their pride bruised more than their bodies. The townsfolk whispered to one another, shaking their heads at the growing list of failures. Over the following days, more men tried, each thinking they were the one to conquer the impossible horse. They brought ropes, spurs, and all sorts of tricks they had learned over years of experience. Yet every single attempt ended the same way. Thunderbolt was untamed, unyielding, and completely aware of his own strength. The crowd, which had gathered to watch, grew both frustrated and fascinated. They admired Margaret's courage for presenting such a challenge and secretly worried that no man would ever succeed. Through all this, Margaret remained calm. She never shouted, scolded, or lost patience. She watched every attempt with keen eyes, noting the mistakes of the men who tried and failed. She understood her horse better than anyone else, recognizing the subtle signs of fear, impatience, or arrogance that caused the riders to fall. While others were quick to blame the horse, Margaret knew the truth. Thunderbolt would only respond to someone who respected him and understood him. Amid the chaos of repeated failures, there was one man who stood apart from the rest. He was a quiet, solitary cowboy named Luke Carson, known in small circles as a skilled horseman, but not one to boast or seek attention. Luke had lived on the outskirts of Red Creek, working alone on his own small ranch and keeping mostly to himself. He wasn't loud, he didn't chase fame, and he certainly didn't enter the town's gossip or competitions. But he had something none of the other men had: patience, understanding, and a natural connection with horses. Luke watched from a distance as the 25 men attempted to ride Thunderbolt. He observed the way each man approached the horse, the way they handled themselves, and the mistakes they made. He noticed that most men relied on force, trying to dominate the stallion rather than communicate with him. They pulled harshly on the reins, leaned too far forward, or panicked when the horse made sudden moves. Luke, however, remained calm. He didn't feel the need to prove himself to the crowd or impress anyone. He understood that riding Thunderbolt would require more than bravery. It would require trust, respect, and timing. For days, Luke practiced on nearby horses, quietly refining his balance, learning to anticipate a horse's movements, and mastering the subtle signals that horses respond to. He knew that to ride Thunderbolt successfully, he couldn't just be strong. He had to be in tune with the animal's spirit. As he trained, he occasionally glanced at Margaret, who watched him from her porch. She noticed his calm demeanor and the care he showed around other horses. Unlike the other men, Luke didn't rush or force things. He simply observed, learned, and prepared. The townsfolk began to notice him as well. While they whispered about the men who failed, they started to wonder about the quiet cowboy who seemed different. He didn't boast or brag. He didn't rush to try the challenge for attention. But there was something in his steady movements, the way he handled horses, and the thoughtful expression on his face that made people curious. Even Margaret found herself intrigued. Here was a man who didn't seek glory but seemed to understand her and her stallion in a way no one else had. By the end of the week, the failures of the 25 men had become a legend in Red Creek. The townsfolk gathered in small groups to talk about the widow Hayes and her impossible challenge. Some shook their heads in disbelief, others laughed at the daring attempts, but all agreed on one thing: anyone who could ride Thunderbolt would be a true hero. Yet among the crowd, Luke remained quiet, calm, and focused. He was ready, not for fame, not for recognition, but because he knew he had the skill and patience needed to face the challenge. The stage was set. Thunderbolt, majestic and proud, waited in the corral, his black coat glistening in the sunlight. Margaret stood nearby, her eyes sharp, her presence commanding, and her mind curious about the quiet cowboy who might finally succeed where 25 others had failed. The town held its breath, the wind carrying the scent of dust and hay, as everyone wondered if a true cowboy would finally emerge. Luke took a deep breath, adjusting his hat and approaching the stallion with steady, respectful steps. Unlike the others, he didn't rush or shout. He spoke softly to the horse, feeling its strength beneath him, and preparing himself for the ride of a lifetime. The first part of this remarkable story had ended with failure and frustration for the town. But the beginning of something extraordinary was quietly taking shape. An attempt that would test courage, skill, patience, and the mysterious bond between a man and a horse. And so, as the sun climbed higher in the sky and the townsfolk watched with bated breath, the challenge of Thunderbolt, the Widow Hayes' wild stallion, was about to reach a turning point that no one would forget. After watching 25 men fail, Luke Carson knew that rushing into the challenge would only end in disaster. He had seen it over and over, the men who relied on force rather than understanding, who underestimated Thunderbolt's intelligence and spirit, and who thought that being loud or bold could tame the wild stallion. Luke was different. He understood that to succeed, he needed more than courage. He needed patience, respect, and a deep connection with the horse. He began his preparation quietly. Early in the morning, before the sun had fully risen, Luke would walk through the fields of his small ranch, observing the movements of his own horses. He studied how they reacted to touch, to commands, and to small changes in their environment. He practiced mounting and dismounting smoothly, keeping his balance, and learning to move in harmony with the horse beneath him. Each movement, each small exercise, was a step toward building the skill he knew he would need for Thunderbolt. Luke didn't rush. He spent hours understanding how horses think, how they respond to subtle cues, and how a rider can communicate with them without force. He watched his own horse's ears, eyes, and tails, noticing how slight changes in posture indicated fear, curiosity, or trust. He learned to adjust his own body accordingly, keeping his movements calm and confident. It was not enough to sit on a horse. He needed to anticipate its reactions and work with its natural instincts. At the same time, Luke observed Thunderbolt from a distance. The stallion was magnificent, moving with a fluid strength that was both beautiful and intimidating. Luke noticed that the horse's eyes were sharp and intelligent, constantly analyzing every movement around him. He saw how Thunderbolt responded to the other men, how he tested their patience, challenged their balance, and reacted to any hint of force or impatience. Luke realized that the key to success would not be to dominate Thunderbolt, but to earn his trust and work as a team with him. While Luke trained, Margaret Hayes observed him closely. She had seen many men try to ride Thunderbolt, and all of them had failed. Yet this man, quiet and unassuming, showed no sign of arrogance or rush. He handled the horses gently, spoke to them softly, and seemed to understand their nature without effort. Margaret found herself intrigued. There was a calm confidence about him that was completely different from the brashness of the other men. She could not help but watch as he moved with a quiet purpose, preparing for a challenge that most considered impossible. Days passed, and Luke's preparation grew more intense. He spent time with Thunderbolt whenever he could, carefully approaching the stallion, speaking in soft tones, and letting the horse become familiar with his presence. He did not try to force himself onto Thunderbolt's back. Instead, he allowed the stallion to observe him, to understand that he was calm, respectful, and patient. Slowly, he began to touch the horse, running his hands along Thunderbolt's strong neck, feeling the muscle and the rhythm of his breathing. He learned how to adjust his balance when the horse shifted, and how to move with him rather than against him. The townsfolk, curious as always, began to notice Luke's methods. While other men had rushed in, shouting and trying to prove themselves, Luke remained silent and focused. Some whispered that he might actually succeed where the others had failed. Others were skeptical, unsure if patience alone could conquer a horse as wild as Thunderbolt. Margaret, however, was impressed. She could see the care he took, the thought behind every movement, and the respect he showed for her prized stallion. Slowly, her curiosity turned into admiration. Luke also prepared himself mentally. He knew that the challenge would not only test his skill, but also his courage. Thunderbolt was unpredictable, and one wrong move could lead to a fall or injury. Luke spent time visualizing the ride, imagining how the horse might react, and planning how he would respond. He reminded himself to stay calm, to focus on the horse rather than the crowd, and to trust in his training. He understood that success depended on both mind and body, and he cultivated patience and confidence in equal measure. Meanwhile, the townsfolk continued to gossip about the ongoing challenge. Every day, they discussed the failures of the 25 men, shaking their heads in disbelief. "No one can ride that horse," they said. "It's impossible." But others speculated about the quiet cowboy who spent hours training and observing. "Maybe he's different," some whispered. "Maybe he understands horses in a way the others don't." Margaret listened to these conversations, but she focused more on observing Luke himself. She saw how he moved, how he treated the animals, and how he respected Thunderbolt. There was a difference, she realized, between those who sought glory and those who sought understanding. Luke's preparation was meticulous. He practiced mounting and dismounting from different horses, adjusting his weight and stance to maintain balance. He worked on riding without relying on spurs or harsh commands, learning to guide a horse through subtle shifts in posture and gentle pressure from the reins. He practiced reacting to sudden movements, anticipating the horse's instincts, and maintaining control without force. Each exercise brought him closer to the harmony he would need with Thunderbolt. At night, after training, Luke would often sit by his small fire, thinking about the challenge ahead. He understood that riding Thunderbolt was not about proving himself to the town or to Margaret, it was about earning the stallion's trust. He respected the horse's spirit, recognizing that force or arrogance would only lead to failure. He reminded himself to remain patient, to observe, and to respond thoughtfully. His preparation was as much about character as it was about skill. During this time, Margaret began to see a change in her own feelings. She had admired strength and bravery in the past, but there was something different about Luke. He was humble, patient, and skilled without seeking attention. He did not boast, did not challenge others, and did not rush. Instead, he worked quietly, showing respect to both her and Thunderbolt. For the first time, she felt that someone might truly understand her world, the challenges she faced, and the spirit of her stallion. As the day of the attempt drew closer, Luke felt ready. He had spent weeks preparing, observing, and learning. He had practiced with other horses, studied Thunderbolt, and strengthened his mind and body for the ride. He felt confident, not in arrogance, but in the knowledge that he had done everything he could to succeed. The quiet cowboy, who had observed from the shadows, while others failed, was now ready to step forward. The townsfolk noticed his presence more and more. They whispered among themselves, some doubtful, some hopeful. The other men, who had failed one by one, watched Luke with a mix of curiosity and envy. They had underestimated the quiet cowboy, assuming he was like the rest. But he had prepared in a way they never considered. He did not rush. He did not seek attention. Instead, he focused on understanding, patience, and respect, the very qualities that had eluded all the others. Finally, the day arrived when Luke would face Thunderbolt directly. The town gathered, eager to see if this quiet man could succeed where 25 had failed. Margaret stood nearby, her eyes fixed on him, a mixture of curiosity and hope in her gaze. Luke approached the stallion calmly, taking deep breaths and speaking softly to the animal. Thunderbolt, sensing a difference in this man, moved with caution but without fear. The crowd held its breath, the air thick with anticipation. Luke adjusted his stance, feeling the rhythm of the horse beneath him. He had prepared for this moment in every way possible, physically, mentally, and emotionally. Unlike the other men, he did not seek to dominate. He sought to understand. He knew that the connection between rider and horse was the key to success. The quiet cowboy, patient and focused, was about to attempt the impossible, ready to prove that true skill and understanding could achieve what force and arrogance could not. And so, the stage was set for a remarkable moment in the town's history. After weeks of preparation, observation, and quiet training, Luke Carson was ready to face Thunderbolt, the Widow Hayes' untamed stallion. The challenge that had humbled 25 men and captivated the town was about to reach a turning point. Luke's patience, respect, and understanding would finally be put to the test, and the people of Red Creek would soon witness whether the quiet cowboy could achieve what so many had deemed impossible. The day had finally come. The sun hung high in the sky, warming the dusty streets of Red Creek, and a hush fell over the townsfolk as they gathered near the corral. Everyone had heard about the 25 men who had failed to ride Thunderbolt, and anticipation crackled in the air like lightning. The widow Hayes stood nearby, her arms crossed and her gaze fixed on the stallion. Thunderbolt pawed at the ground, his muscles taut and rippling under his black coat. Eyes sharp and alert, ears flicking at every sound. He was ready, and he knew it. Luke Carson approached slowly, his calm presence contrasting with the excited chatter of the crowd. Unlike the other men, he did not shout, boast, or try to impress anyone. He simply walked with purpose, keeping his movements smooth and deliberate. His eyes were on the stallion, observing every shift in weight, every flick of the tail, every twitch of the muscles. He did not fear the horse, nor did he underestimate him. He knew that this ride was not about force, it was about balance, patience, and understanding. The townsfolk watched, leaning forward in anticipation. Many whispered nervously, unsure whether this quiet cowboy could succeed where so many others had failed. Some skeptics shook their heads, muttering that patience alone could not tame a horse as wild and powerful as Thunderbolt. But Luke paid no attention to them. His focus was entirely on the stallion. He had spent weeks preparing for this moment, training his body, observing other horses, and understanding Thunderbolt's habits. Now, it was time to put it all into action. Luke approached the corral slowly, speaking in soft, low tones to the stallion. Thunderbolt's ears flicked toward him, and his breathing remained steady. Luke reached out, letting the horse see that he was calm and trustworthy. He ran a hand gently along Thunderbolt's neck, feeling the powerful muscles beneath his palm, and allowed the stallion to become familiar with his presence. There was no rush, no hurry, only a quiet communication between man and horse. Finally, Luke mounted. He adjusted his hat, gripped the reins lightly, and settled into the saddle. Thunderbolt shifted under him, sensing the rider's calm and careful approach. Unlike the men before him, Luke did not try to force the horse into submission. He moved with him, adjusting his balance, anticipating every twist and buck. The crowd gasped as the stallion tested the new rider with sudden jumps and sharp turns, but Luke held steady, his body flowing with Thunderbolt's movements, his hands gentle yet firm on the reins. For the first few minutes, the ride seemed almost magical. Luke's skill and patience were evident in the way he moved in harmony with the stallion. The horse twisted, bucked, and leaped. But the cowboy responded to each movement with precision. Every twitch, every sudden motion, was met with calm and calculated adjustment. The crowd watched in awe, realizing that this was unlike any attempt they had ever seen. The quiet cowboy was not fighting the horse. He was working with him, becoming a part of Thunderbolt's rhythm. Thunderbolt's power was immense, and the challenge was far from easy. At one point, the stallion reared up, his front hooves clawing at the air. The townsfolk held their breath, expecting Luke to fall like all the others. But the cowboy leaned back slightly, adjusting his center of gravity, and allowed Thunderbolt to land safely without losing control. It was a delicate balance of skill, timing, and intuition. Luke had anticipated the movement, responding in a way that calmed the horse rather than startling him. The crowd erupted into whispers and murmurs of amazement. "He's still on!" someone exclaimed. "He's doing it!" Another man shook his head in disbelief. "How is he doing that?" The difference was clear to everyone watching. Luke was not a reckless rider seeking fame. He was a skilled cowboy who respected the horse and understood its spirit. Every movement, every adjustment, was a testament to his training and patience. As the ride continued, Luke guided Thunderbolt through the corral, maintaining a perfect balance between control and freedom. He did not use harsh spurs or pull forcefully on the reins. Instead, he used subtle shifts in posture, small pressures on the reins, and soft words to communicate with the stallion. Thunderbolt responded with remarkable precision, acknowledging Luke as a partner rather than a master. It was clear that a bond was forming a connection built on trust, respect, and understanding. Margaret Hayes watched, her eyes widening with admiration. She had seen many men attempt this ride, and none had succeeded. Yet here was Luke, quiet and focused, achieving what seemed impossible. She felt a mixture of pride, curiosity, and something deeper she could not name. There was something about this man, his calm confidence, his respect for her horse, and his patience that made her heart beat a little faster. She realized that Luke was different from anyone she had ever met. The ride was not without its challenges. Thunderbolt was strong, unpredictable, and tested Luke at every moment. He bucked violently at one point, spinning in a sudden twist, trying to shake the rider off. The crowd gasped, expecting failure. But Luke held on, his legs gripping the horse's sides firmly yet gently, his body moving with the stallion's every motion. He anticipated the jumps, adjusted his balance, and maintained control without force. It was a delicate dance, a test of courage and skill that only someone truly attuned to horses could achieve. Luke also demonstrated incredible patience. He did not rush the horse or try to dominate him. When Thunderbolt became tense or tried to bolt, Luke stayed calm, using soft words and subtle cues to regain his horse's focus. The crowd began to realize that this was the key difference between Luke and the other men. Whereas the others had tried to force Thunderbolt to obey, Luke was working with him, building trust and harmony with every movement. As the ride reached its peak, Thunderbolt performed a series of leaps and spins that had thrown every other man. Luke responded with calm precision, adjusting his balance and keeping his center steady. The horse began to relax slightly under the cowboy's careful guidance, acknowledging him as a true partner. The crowd watched in stunned silence, realizing that they were witnessing something extraordinary. Finally, after what felt like an eternity, Thunderbolt slowed, his powerful muscles relaxing as he trotted calmly around the corral. Luke remained mounted, his posture steady and composed. The crowd erupted into cheers and applause, a mix of amazement and relief filling the air. 25 men had failed, but this quiet, patient cowboy had succeeded. He had not conquered the horse through force or arrogance. He had earned its respect and formed a connection that no one else could replicate. Margaret Hayes approached, her eyes shining with admiration and pride. She extended her hand, and Luke dismounted carefully, keeping his movements calm and controlled. "You've done what no one else could," she said softly, her voice filled with genuine respect. Luke nodded, acknowledging both the horse and the widow. There was no boastful pride in him, only humility and quiet satisfaction at a challenge well met. Thunderbolt, the magnificent black stallion, stood calmly beside Luke, no longer restless or wild. The bond between horse and rider was evident to everyone present. The townsfolk, who had doubted the quiet cowboy, now looked at him with awe. He had proven that skill, patience, and understanding could achieve what force and arrogance could not. The story of the 25 men who failed would fade, replaced by the tale of Luke Carson, the cowboy who tamed the untamable with respect and quiet determination. Margaret smiled, realizing that she had found not only a true cowboy, but also someone who shared her values, someone who understood patience, respect, and courage. The ride had been more than a test of skill. It had been a demonstration of character. Luke had shown that true strength comes from understanding and harmony, not domination. As the sun began to set, casting long shadows across the corral, the crowd slowly dispersed, still talking excitedly about the ride they had just witnessed. Luke Carson stood beside Thunderbolt, the stallion calm and majestic. And Margaret Hayes looked on, a mix of pride, curiosity, and admiration in her eyes. A challenge that had humbled 25 men had been met not with brute force, but with skill, patience, and respect, the qualities of a true cowboy. And so, the remarkable ride ended, not with chaos or failure, but with triumph. Luke Carson had proven that understanding, preparation, and quiet confidence could succeed where many had failed. The townsfolk would remember this day for years, telling the story of the cowboy who rode Thunderbolt with skill and respect, capturing the hearts of both the horse and the widow who had set the challenge. The corral was still, the dust settling gently around Thunderbolt's hooves. The crowd, once full of chatter and anticipation, now stood silent in awe, absorbing what they had just witnessed. Luke Carson, the quiet cowboy, had done what no one else could. He had ridden Thunderbolt with skill, patience, and respect, earning the horse's trust and admiration. The air seemed charged with a mixture of relief, excitement, and wonder, as the townsfolk whispered among themselves, realizing they had seen something truly extraordinary. Margaret Hayes remained near the edge of the corral, her eyes fixed on Luke. Pride shone in her expression. But there was more than admiration. There was a spark of curiosity and a hint of something deeper, something she hadn't expected to feel. She had set the challenge to find someone brave and skilled, perhaps to test the limits of her stallion. But now she found herself intrigued by the quiet cowboy who had accomplished the impossible. Luke's demeanor was humble, his movements calm and careful, yet there was a quiet strength about him that made her heart take notice. Luke dismounted slowly, keeping his posture steady and his movements deliberate. He did not boast or seek recognition. Instead, he acknowledged Thunderbolt with a gentle touch, running his hand along the stallion's sleek black coat and speaking softly. The horse, once wild and untamable, now stood calm and composed, responding to Luke with a quiet trust that had not existed before. It was clear to everyone that this was more than a ride. It was a bond, forged between horse and rider, through patience, understanding, and respect. Margaret stepped closer, her boots crunching softly on the corral's dirt. She extended her hand toward Luke, her eyes gleaming with admiration. "You've done what no one else could," she said, her voice steady but warm. Luke looked at her and nodded respectfully. "Thunderbolt is a remarkable horse," he said simply. "He doesn't respond to force or anger, he responds to patience and respect. He's not a horse to be conquered, he's a partner to be understood." Her eyes softened, and she allowed herself a small smile. "I can see that," she said. "You've proven more than your skill. You've proven your character." Quote, the townsfolk, now recovering from their initial shock, began to cheer and clap. Their excitement grew louder as they realized the magnitude of what had just happened. The whispers turned into stories. The quiet cowboy had succeeded where 25 men had failed. He had not only ridden the wild stallion but had done so with grace, patience, and respect, earning the admiration of everyone present. Amid the celebration, Luke took a moment to speak privately with Margaret. They walked to the side of the corral, away from the crowd, and she observed him carefully. There was a humility in his manner, a calmness in his voice, and a quiet confidence in his eyes that contrasted sharply with the arrogance and recklessness of the men who had tried before. For the first time, Margaret felt that she had found someone who truly understood her world, her life, and the spirit of her beloved stallion. "You didn't rush," she said softly. "You didn't try to show off or impress anyone. You just worked with him." Luke nodded. "I've learned that trying to dominate a horse only leads to failure. Patience, understanding, and respect, that's the only way to succeed with an animal like Thunderbolt. And it seems that these qualities matter in people too." Margaret's lips curved into a thoughtful smile. There was an unspoken acknowledgement between them, a recognition of shared values and mutual respect. For weeks, she had wondered if anyone could rise to the challenge of her stallion. And now she realized that it was not just about riding a horse, it was about finding someone who shared her outlook on life, someone who understood that strength and skill come from harmony, not force. Over the next few hours, Luke and Margaret worked together with Thunderbolt, guiding him through gentle exercises and allowing the horse to grow accustomed to his new rider. The stallion, once restless and unpredictable, responded calmly to Luke's cues, showing a level of trust that astonished everyone watching. Margaret marveled at the partnership, impressed not only by Luke's ability, but by the care and attention he showed toward her prized animal. She realized that this man had not only proven himself as a cowboy but had also earned her respect in a way that no one else had. As the day went on, the townsfolk slowly dispersed, still talking excitedly about the ride. They speculated on how Luke had accomplished what seemed impossible, and many approached Margaret to congratulate her on finding such a remarkable cowboy. But she barely noticed the chatter around her. Her attention remained on Luke and the quiet confidence he exuded. There was a sense of peace and connection between them, a bond that had grown naturally through the shared experience of the ride. Margaret began to see Luke not only as a skilled cowboy, but as a companion who could stand beside her in both work and life. She had spent years managing her ranch alone, relying on her own strength and determination. But now she realized that having someone she could trust, someone who respected her world and shared her values, was invaluable. Luke had shown that true courage and skill were not about proving oneself to others, but about understanding and respect. And she admired that deeply. Luke, in turn, appreciated Margaret's independence, her strength, and her unwavering commitment to her ranch and her stallion. He had seen many women who were either afraid of horses or underestimated their abilities. But Margaret was different. She commanded respect naturally, and she cared deeply for Thunderbolt, nurturing him with patience and love. Luke realized that he had not only found a horse worth respecting, but also a person whose spirit matched his own. In the days that followed, Luke and Margaret spent more time together, working on the ranch and caring for Thunderbolt. Their partnership grew naturally, built on trust, mutual respect, and shared values. Luke helped with the daily tasks, mending fences, checking on livestock, and training younger horses, while Margaret taught him more about Thunderbolt and the subtle cues that made her stallion so remarkable. They communicated without words at times, understanding each other's intentions and respecting each other's skills. The bond between Luke and Margaret was noticed by the townsfolk, who watched with curiosity and admiration as the quiet cowboy and the strong-willed widow worked side by side. There was no need for grand declarations or gestures. Their connection was evident in the way they handled the horses, supported each other in daily tasks, and shared quiet moments of understanding. Margaret felt a sense of relief and joy she hadn't experienced in years, knowing that she had found someone she could trust completely. Thunderbolt, too, responded to the new partnership. The stallion, once restless and unpredictable, now moved with confidence and calmness, reflecting the bond he shared with Luke. Margaret observed this transformation with awe. She realized that the ride had not only proven Luke's skill, but had also strengthened the connection between horse and rider in a way that no one else had achieved. It was a moment of triumph, not only for Luke, but for everyone who believed in patience, understanding, and respect. As the sun began to set, casting long shadows across the ranch, Margaret and Luke stood together, watching Thunderbolt graze peacefully. There was a quiet satisfaction in the air, a sense that something extraordinary had been accomplished. The challenge that had humbled 25 men had brought them together, creating a bond that was stronger than either of them had anticipated. They shared a glance, acknowledging the trust, respect, and understanding that had grown between them in such a short time. Margaret finally spoke, her voice gentle but firm. "I think you've proven more than just your skill as a cowboy. You've shown patience, respect, and a calm strength that I admire greatly." Luke smiled softly. "I've learned from the best," he replied, glancing at Thunderbolt. "And from someone who understands what it means to care for a horse and a ranch. You've taught me that strength isn't just about riding. It's about knowing when to be patient and how to work together. For the first time in years, Margaret felt a sense of companionship and hope for the future. She realized that the challenge had been more than a test of courage. It had been a way to find someone who shared her values, someone she could trust and rely on. Luke Carson had not only succeeded in riding Thunderbolt, but he had also proven himself worthy of respect, admiration, and perhaps something even more meaningful: friendship and partnership. The day ended with a sense of quiet triumph. The townsfolk returned to their homes, still talking excitedly about the ride, while Margaret and Luke remained at the ranch, tending to Thunderbolt and sharing stories about horses, ranch work, and life. Their connection deepened naturally, built on shared experiences, respect, and mutual understanding. What had begun as a simple challenge had grown into the start of a remarkable partnership, one that would continue to grow stronger with time. And so, the story of the quiet cowboy who rode Thunderbolt successfully became not just a tale of skill, but a story of respect, patience, and the bond that can form between people who understand and value each other. Margaret Hayes, the independent widow, had found in Luke Carson not only a true cowboy, but a trusted partner. Someone who could stand beside her through challenges, adventures, and the daily life of running a ranch. Together, they had achieved something extraordinary, proving that patience, understanding, and respect could accomplish what force and arrogance never could. The days after the remarkable ride of Thunderbolt were filled with a sense of calm and satisfaction. The town of Red Creek buzzed with stories of Luke Carson's extraordinary feat. Yet the cowboy himself remained quietly focused on his work. He did not seek praise or attention. Instead, he dedicated himself to the tasks at hand, helping Margaret Hayes with the daily life of running the ranch. There was no hurry, no need to prove himself further. He had already earned respect through his actions and patience. Margaret, too, felt a change within herself. She had always been independent, managing her ranch alone and relying on her own strength and determination. But now, with Luke by her side, she discovered a new kind of partnership, one built not on necessity, but on mutual respect and shared values. Luke did not try to take control or dominate the ranch. He worked alongside her, learning from her experience and contributing his own skills. Together, they became a team, each respecting the other's abilities and knowledge. Luke quickly became an essential part of the ranch. He helped with the chores, mended fences, checked on livestock, and guided the younger horses through training exercises. Yet, his presence was not just practical, it brought a sense of balance and calm to the ranch. Margaret noticed that Thunderbolt, who had once been wild and unpredictable, now responded more confidently under Luke's guidance. The stallion's trust in the cowboy seemed to grow with each passing day, reflecting the harmony and understanding that had developed between them. Despite the success of the ride, Luke remained humble. He did not boast to the townsfolk or seek admiration for what he had accomplished. Instead, he allowed his actions to speak for themselves. He worked diligently, showing respect to Margaret, to Thunderbolt, and to the other animals on the ranch. This quiet dedication earned him admiration, not only from Margaret, but from the community as well. People who had once doubted him now spoke of his skill, patience, and character with genuine respect. Margaret and Luke also found moments of connection beyond the work on the ranch. They shared stories, discussed strategies for caring for the horses, and reflected on the lessons they had learned from the challenge. Luke admired Margaret's strength, independence, and unwavering commitment to her ranch and animals. Margaret admired Luke's calm confidence, patience, and his ability to understand both horses and people. Over time, these shared experiences nurtured a deep bond, a quiet understanding that grew stronger with each passing day. One morning, as the sun rose and painted the ranch in golden light, Margaret and Luke worked side by side in the corral. Thunderbolt trotted calmly beside them, his muscles relaxed and his eyes attentive. Margaret looked at Luke and smiled. feeling a sense of gratitude and connection she had not experienced in years. "You've changed things here," she said softly. "Not just with Thunderbolt, but with the ranch. And with me." Luke smiled in response, his calm demeanor reflecting the same sense of satisfaction. "I've only tried to do my part," he said. "The ranch, the horses, they already had strength. I just needed to understand them and work with what's here. And you've taught me a lot about patience and respect." There was a quiet moment between them, a shared understanding that words alone could not capture. They had come together through the challenge, through hard work, and through mutual respect. Their partnership was no longer just about riding a horse, it was about trust, collaboration, and the knowledge that each could rely on the other through every challenge the ranch might present. As weeks turned into months, Luke became an indispensable companion for Margaret. They shared responsibilities, supported each other, and built routines that strengthened both their partnership and the ranch itself. Margaret noticed how comfortable and confident Thunderbolt had become under Luke's guidance. The stallion moved with a grace and calmness that had seemed impossible before, reflecting the skill and patience of the cowboy who had earned his trust. The townsfolk of Red Creek continued to speak of Luke's remarkable ride. But the story grew into something larger than a single feat. It became a tale of character, patience, and understanding. People began to realize that true strength was not about boasting, rushing, or relying on force, but about respect, humility, and dedication. Luke Carson had demonstrated this in every way, not just through his ride, but through his actions on the ranch and his quiet, steady presence in Margaret's life. Margaret and Luke also began to enjoy small moments of companionship outside of their work. They shared meals on the porch of the ranch house, discussing the day's tasks and enjoying each other's company. They explored the fields together, checking on the horses and the fences, talking quietly about the land and the animals. These moments, though simple, deepened their connection, creating a sense of partnership and trust that neither had expected when the challenge began. Luke's humility and skill inspired Margaret in ways she had not anticipated. She found herself relying on him not only for physical tasks, but also for guidance, insight, and companionship. He respected her independence and experience, never trying to take control, but always offering support and wisdom when needed. Margaret realized that this partnership, born from a single challenge, with a wild stallion, had grown into something far more meaningful. Thunderbolt became a symbol of their partnership. Once wild and unmanageable, he now moved with a calm confidence, reflecting the harmony between Luke and Margaret. The stallion's behavior mirrored the trust and understanding that had developed not only between horse and rider, but between the cowboy and the widow. It was a visible sign of the bond they had created, a bond built on patience, skill, and mutual respect. Over time, the story of the challenge spread beyond Red Creek. Travelers and neighbors came to hear about the quiet cowboy who had succeeded where 25 men had failed. But Luke never sought fame. He continued to work diligently on the ranch, letting his actions speak for him. Margaret admired this about him. His humility and dedication only strengthened her respect and trust. Together, they demonstrated that true partnership, whether with animals or people, was rooted in patience, understanding, and mutual support. One late afternoon, as the sun began to dip below the horizon, Margaret and Luke stood together at the edge of the ranch, watching Thunderbolt graze in the field. The warm light bathed the scene in a soft glow, highlighting the bond between the cowboy, the widow, and the magnificent stallion. Margaret felt a deep sense of contentment, realizing that life on the ranch had changed for the better. She had found not only a skilled rider but a trusted partner, someone who shared her values, respected her independence, and had the patience and character to earn her trust. Luke looked at Margaret and smiled. "We've come a long way," he said quietly. "Thunderbolt trusts me. The ranch is in good hands, and I feel like we understand each other." Margaret nodded, her smile reflecting the warmth and connection she felt. "We do," she replied. "It's more than just a ride. It's about everything we've built together." As the weeks turned into months, the partnership between Margaret and Luke grew stronger. They continued to care for the ranch, guide the horses, and support each other through every challenge. Their relationship was built on trust, respect, and a shared understanding of what it meant to work with animals and with each other. The quiet cowboy and the independent widow had found in each other not just companionship, but a deep and lasting partnership. In the end, the story of Luke Carson and Margaret Hayes was not just about a challenge with a wild stallion. It was about patience, understanding, respect, and the power of partnership. 25 men had failed to ride Thunderbolt, but Luke had succeeded not through force or bravado, but through skill, humility, and care. And in doing so, he had earned not only the stallion's trust, but also Margaret's admiration, respect, and partnership. The days continued peacefully on the ranch. Luke and Margaret worked together, shared their knowledge, and grew closer with every task. Thunderbolt, once untamed, now moved with a grace and calmness that reflected the harmony between rider and horse. Life on the ranch was filled with purpose, connection, and quiet joy. The challenge that had begun as a test of courage had grown into a story of trust, skill, and partnership, one that would be remembered in Red Creek for years to come. And so, the quiet cowboy who had proven himself against impossible odds became a trusted companion, a respected partner, and a friend who shared in the challenges and joys of ranch life. Margaret Hayes, strong and independent, had found someone who complemented her spirit, someone who could stand by her side through thick and thin. Together, they had turned a simple challenge into a lifelong bond, one built on patience, understanding, respect, and the shared love of horses and the land. The story ended not with a show of strength, but with a quiet, lasting harmony. The cowboy, the widow, and the stallion, three spirits, brought together by patience, skill, and mutual respect, had created something truly extraordinary. And in the calm of the Red Creek evening, as the sun set behind the hills, it was clear to everyone that the greatest victories were not always the loudest or the fastest, but those built on trust, understanding, and the bonds we choose to nurture.